Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Rochelle, and I'm working with Julie Gonzalez on our presentation about caffeine and young people. So I'll be doing the introduction, and Julie will be finishing off the commentary about it. So first of all, it's very important to understand what caffeine is as a substance and how it can be taken. So, caffeine is a bitter alkaloid that serves as a stimulant toward the nervous system. It's widely and commonly consumed universally through the form of either coffee or tea. Tea is one of the most widely consumed beverages, and it has the highest consumption capital in countries like Iran, the United Kingdom, and Turkey. However, there is much to be concerned about regarding the regular intake of caffeine and the adverse effects that it may result from a caffeine addiction, especially regarding young people. So now that we know what caffeine is, I think it's very important to introduce caffeine addiction by how one gets introduced to caffeine as well, just regularly on every day. And keep in mind that we are talking about adolescents and children in specific being introduced to caffeine. So, caffeine is the world's most prevalent drug. It is commonly distributed both over the counter and in numerous prescription medications, some of which you may utilize yourself and be aware of. So, caffeine distribution is actually unregulated in the United States Food and Drugs Administration. Completely unregulated, no policies regarding it. Yet there are explicit mentions of caffeine intoxication, caffeine withdrawal, caffeine-induced anxiety disorders, caffeine-induced insomnia, and caffeine-related disorders that are not otherwise explicitly mentioned in the DSM-5. So that might appear to be an oversight on the U.S. Food and Drugs Administration's part, given that fact. So some examples of things that children and adolescents can get their hands on that do have caffeine in them and is normal for them to eat and consume is chocolate, coffee, tea, colas, carbonated drinks, and non-carbonated drinks as well. All of these things can be purchased over the counter and is not even a prescription. So now that we know what has caffeine in it and how easy it is to get a hold of, it's important to discuss what caffeine addiction then is. So caffeine addiction or caffeine use disorder is a disorder or condition wherein a person compulsively consumes caffeine regularly enough that negative consequences of that use derive in their daily life. So it is involving usually a physical dependency on caffeine in order to properly function. So they may experience persistent desires to cut down or control that caffeine intake. They will also usually have unsuccessful attempts to cut down or control that caffeine use. They may then experience problems caused by caffeine or worsened by caffeine. Their significant withdrawal symptoms do arise. Then the use of caffeine is used in order to relieve or avoid withdrawal symptoms. And those are the components of caffeine use disorder, which is a problematic pattern of caffeine consumption overall. In the United States of America, around 75% of children under the age of 18 consume caffeine regularly, which contributes to the significance of a caffeine addiction. Soft drinks are served as the largest source of caffeine for youth, yet the usage of coffee and tea has in fact doubled since 1999. A lot of speculation that goes behind the reason why include that caffeine can be modified with sugars, sweeteners, can be modified with milk, can be added chocolates, whipped cream, all sorts of things to make a traditionally bitter treat into a sweet one. And that appears to be working and selling very well for caffeine like coffee or tea. As well, energy drinks are gaining popularity amongst teens. These 50 to 357 milligram caffeine laden beverages contain guarana, ginseng, B vitamins, and sugar, and are advertised as mood boosting and cognitive and motor performance boosting. Energy shots of about 50 milliliters and drops, which are concentrated liquid additives, are also being sold. Taking a moment to talk just exclusively about energy drinks that are being marketed towards kids, it is important to understand that while energy drinks are only a small part of adolescent caffeine intake, it can still cause a lot of damage to adolescent and young people. Some examples of this include that they may experience more nausea, they may have increased anxiety, they may experience racing hearts, where their heart beats really quickly. They can be induced into seizures. They may have heart failure and increased ER visits or emergency room visits. In fact, a lot of energy drink manufacturers have been recently criticized for using young athletes and superstars in ads, edgy packaging, sponsored teen events, and advertising. Still, caffeine use amongst children and adolescents raises multiple concerns beyond these particular issues. Some of these alternative concerns that we have regarding what else could happen to young people who are using caffeine and taking in caffeine regularly include that regular usage of caffeine can result in symptoms of dependency that users as young as age 13 have experienced and experience within withdrawal symptoms when attempting to better regulate or control their usage. So they're experiencing it to such an intense state, they're experiencing typical withdrawal issues like heightened stress and things like that. Children who regularly consume moderate amounts of caffeine for adults, which is about 100 to 400 milligrams daily, can experience anxiety and nervousness. They experience hyperactive behavior. They experience disrupted sleep. And these symptoms may impact learning and the developmental processes as they go throughout their day. While small to moderate amounts of caffeine have immediate positive effects on mood, mental alertness, and motor performance, these effects can have a dire impact after repeated use. The delayed consequences of chronic use may very well be the recipe for the development of addiction behavior, and that is a major concern for a lot of people when talking about caffeine use disorder, especially amongst adolescents. Caffeine, when combined with other substances, may also reinforce the development of unhealthy behaviors. As adolescents learn to use caffeine to modify their moods or productivity, it's unclear how this kind of conscious behavior at such a young age may affect their usage of different and alternative substances.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me. And I'm just going to pick up where Rochelle left here on caffeine. So again, acting as a stimulant to the central nervous system, caffeine is the most widely used psychoactive drug in the world. Now, whether symptoms exist to qualify in caffeine as a dependence or abuse disorder continues to be debated. However, the DSM has, in fact, decided to include it. So we're going to talk a little bit about it here. As you can see, it's broken down into 4 different categories. We have intoxication, withdrawal, caffeine-induced mental disorders. So that would be things like caffeine-induced anxiety or sleep disorders. And then we have unspecified caffeine disorders. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're just going to focus on the intoxication and withdrawal. And just for reference for the rest of the presentation, I just want you to keep in mind that 1 regular cup of coffee has approximately 100 milligrams of caffeine in it. Yeah, so as with other disorders, there are specific criteria that a person needs to meet to be considered clinically significant. As you can see here, many of the symptoms associated with either intoxication or withdrawal could be easily misdiagnosed or even completely missed, especially in this young population. So as you can see, we have things like restlessness, nervousness, insomnia, excitement. Um, and then continuing on to the next slide with the withdrawal symptoms, there's things like headache, difficulty concentrating, flu-like symptoms. So as you can see, these symptoms could all easily be overlooked in the young population or even mistaken for something else, like ADHD or another substance use disorder, perhaps. So beyond the symptoms that we just talked about being misinterpreted, evidence also suggests that adolescents are often unaware of suggested serving sizes, how much caffeine is in each product that they're consuming, and how that caffeine affects their actual bodies. Um, I read an interesting kind of take on that in that we can't just assume that children and adolescents are just smaller version of adults. Their bodies are growing and they are processing things a lot different than how an adult body would. So we need to be very mindful of that when we're looking at this population and caffeine consumption. And then, according to Hammond and others, children and youth are more susceptible to the effects of caffeine and other stimulants. And this, coupled with underdeveloped executive functioning, um, leads young people to be, they could easily experience intoxication leading to withdrawal. In fact, a study reported that many young people, in fact, have um, reported adverse side effects from caffeine beverages, namely energy drinks. These effects were so severe that many of them sought medical attention. Among the most noteworthy side effects that were mentioned in the study were jittery, shaking, fast heartbeat, difficulty sleeping, headache, vomiting, nausea, and chest pain. And you have to imagine that this uh, these effects had to have been pretty severe to prompt a child or teenager to tell their parents to get medical attention. So why are we talking about this and why is it important? We decided to focus our project on caffeine um, because children and adolescents are the fastest growing population of caffeine users with a 70% increase in the last 30 years. And this is primarily due to the advent of energy drinks. Beyond this, caffeine is being marketed to children as young as 4 years old. This is astounding given the lack of research that we have on how caffeine affects children and young people. Um, and with that, I just want to take a moment to kind of briefly touch on some of the aspects of caffeine use that are just a little bit more concerning. So Temple contends childhood and adolescence is a critical period of establishing eating patterns and preferences. Um, so caffeine beverages are targeted at children, like soda and energy drinks, and they're often very high in sugar. So further, excessive consumption of soda is linked to poor diet. And with that, children will likely learn to preference sugary foods just based off of the sugary beverages that they consume. Um, and then finally, with that, we know that diet has a significant impact on various areas of growth and development. And, looking into the future, this can affect things like obesity, diabetes, um, and then the litany of other issues that are associated with poor diet. So moving beyond just the health aspect, like eating habits and the sugar that is typically contained in these caffeinated beverages. Um, if we look at the idea of sensitization and cross-sensitization of drugs, this is especially concerning with the young population. So research shows that neuronal response to a drug, for example, caffeine, gets stronger with repeated use. And then cross-sensitization says that the use of one drug, like caffeine or nicotine, enhances the effects of other drugs. So this is relevant regarding like the general population in overall. But it's especially concerning for young people because we're starting them at such a young age. So this increased potential for illicit um, drug use and to carry into illicit drug use or illicit drug seeking. And it may sound extreme to think like caffeine as a gateway drug, but it's not outside the scope of reality to assume a child developing nervous system is being routinely exposed to an altering substance um, that would eventually cause them to seek a similar sensation from other places or other things. So what can we do? Young people are a vulnerable population, and this makes the consequences of their choices a lot more dire to their health. Temple states that they are particularly vulnerable because their brains are undergoing significant development, especially in areas like executive functioning, impulsivity control, and planning. Um, so there's just a few takeaways that we want to leave you all with. First, there's no proven safe dose of caffeine for children. Um, Second, pediatricians advise against caffeine use in children under the age of 12. And just remember, there's energy drink companies that are marketing to children as young as 4 years old. Um, some of the reasons why they make the cans a little bit smaller, you'll notice in energy drinks, is so they're easier for small children to hold on to. Um, Pediatricians also advise against any energy drinks in children and teens, which is significant again because they're being marketed to this population. It's also suggested that caffeine intake be limited to less than 100 milligrams. So that's roughly 2 cans of soda for adolescents between the ages of 12 and 18. Um, can of soda has 12 ounces, put possibly 12 ounces in it, 12, 16. But just think of proportion size, especially in America. If you go to a fast food restaurant and the cup you get full of soda is typically a lot larger than 1 can of soda. So think of our proportions in relativity to their intake being limited to less than 100 milligrams. If they get one soda, um, it's typically a lot larger than just 1 can of soda. So that's just something to be mindful of. Additionally, caffeine has the potential for both dependence and tolerance. Research has proven that. And then finally, caffeine can affect behavior, mood, appetite, and sleep patterns. Childhood and adolescence are vital stages for development in which diet and sleep are absolutely crucial. So just wrapping up here, we just wanted to note the use of caffeine is becoming more and more prevalent in young people, and overuse can be dangerous to their health. Young people are subject to a litany of product advertisements containing caffeine, as we've discussed. And apart from that, they're heavily influenced by what they're seeing and hearing around them. And that would be primary caregivers, parents, teachers, counselors, coaches, anybody that's important in their lives, they're watching and learning from. So we just encourage that you would take the time to teach young people how to read nutrition labels, and talk openly with about caffeine and its effects. People often don't consider it to be that relevant, but it is a stimulant and it is ultimately altering the nervous system and how that is responding to the environment. Um, so the more kids know, the more that they can protect themselves. And as addiction counselors, we may never come in contact or treat somebody that has caffeine intoxication or withdrawal. But it's important to familiarize ourselves with its symptoms because it's included in the DSM and it does affect people. Uh, Youth and young people are some of the most vulnerable populations that we will likely encounter. So we must educate ourselves to best serve and protect them. Thanks so much, guys.